Well, hello and welcome to the Being Formed podcast. My name is Adam Ormord. I am the host of the show and I am the co-founder of LifePoint Resources along with my wife, Rebecca. We are about 4.5 years old as a ministry, and boy, there's exciting things on the horizon for sure as our ministry begins to kind of find its way in the unique offerings that we want to bring. This podcast is one of the unique offerings, so I'm glad that you've joined us today. This episode's a little different. There are no guests joining me, just you and me. We're going to have a conversation about something that has become increasingly important in my own journey of spiritual formation. And everything I do as a spiritual director, all the ministry of LifePoint Resources, I think it all revolves around this idea of relational spirituality. So I've titled this episode, The Relational Soul. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to speak on this topic at an annual gathering of spiritual directors in the United States. And as I revisited those notes recently, I realized how foundational this message continues to be, not only for me, but for many of the people I sit with who are longing for deeper transformation. In fact, I think I've become even more convinced of these truths in the years since I first shared them. That's how experience works, right? We go from knowing something in our heads, lots of great information, to really knowing something experientially. In fact, that's the only way to truly be transformed, which is the goal, to become more and more formed into the image of Christ, to be with Jesus, and to become people of love. So today, I want to explore a simple but profound idea. We are relational souls. Yeah, a few years ago, Rebecca and I were driving from Denver to Phoenix in Arizona. It was still dark outside, and we received a FaceTime call from our granddaughters. Our oldest granddaughter, Nora, at that time would have been about 3.5. Her little sister, Daisy, was about 1.5. And even back then, Nora and her sister would call me Papa Colorado. It was so cute to hear them try to say that word, Papa Colorado. And that's a title I absolutely love. And as we chatted, their mom asked where we were driving early in the morning. And we said, we're headed to Phoenix. Well, Nora paused and she asked, you're going to Kleenex? And we laughed. No, Phoenix. She said, you're going to Kleenex? More laughter. And she could tell we were having fun, so she just kept repeating herself. I'm sure she didn't know what Phoenix was, but she knew enough to keep us going with her little game. You're going to Kleenex? And I think spiritual formation can feel a little like that sometimes. We don't know what we don't know. We hear words like attachment and belovedness and transformation and contemplative prayer and relational spirituality. And, we nod our heads. We recognize that vocabulary, but often we're still learning what those words actually mean in lived experience. Like, it's one thing to say, I trust you, God. It's another thing to come to find out I am living into trust, trusting the God I am coming to know even more fully. One of the books that has profoundly influenced me is a book called The Relational Soul by Richard Plass and James Cofield. Early in the book, they write the following. At the core of our being is this truth. We are designed for and defined by our relationships. We were born with a relentless longing to participate in the lives of others. Fundamentally, we are relational souls. We cannot not be relational. I love that phrase. We cannot not be relational. Just think about that for a moment. We often imagine ourselves as these independent individuals who happen to have relationships, but Scripture paints a different picture. From the very beginning, we encounter a relational God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, existing in eternal communion and love And then this relational God says that's not even enough. God creates human beings in God's own image. So not merely thinking creatures, not merely believing creatures, relational creatures, designed for connection, designed for communion, designed for love. And so this means our spiritual lives cannot be separated from our relationships. The way we relate to God, it matters. The way we relate to others matters. Even the way we relate to ourselves matters. The soul that occupies us, the thing that we are, we're soulful beings, was never intended to exist in isolation. And that's why loneliness hurts so deeply. That's why betrayal wounds hurt us so profoundly. That's why belonging feels so critical, so life-giving. We are relational souls. We cannot not be relational. One of the most helpful frameworks I've encountered comes from Todd Hall in his book Relational Spirituality, written with his wife Elizabeth Hall. The Halls describe two fundamentally different ways of knowing. And this may not be new to you, but it's important to understand. The first way of knowing is just called explicit knowing. That's the analytical knowledge of the facts and the concepts and the ideas and the information that we learn as we experience, life and learn things, in book knowledge, really. And the second kind of knowing is called implicit knowing. And it's experiential knowing. This is a knowing that's relational. It's actually the kind of knowing that the Bible uses over and over and over again. It talks about even like Adam knowing Eve, right? This experiential knowing. It's a kind of knowing that moves beyond information into lived reality. And the Halls write in their book that something more is required to grow than explicit knowledge by itself. Something more is required to grow. If you want to grow, you need more than just fact-based knowledge picked up from a book. Think about someone you deeply love. It could be a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a dear friend. How did you come to love them? Probably not by reading a book about them. You came to love them by being with them, right? Through shared experiences, through trust, through time, through presence, through relationship. Years ago, I was serving with a ministry called Kids at Heart. And often we would ask participants in our trainings to think of someone they deeply loved and try to reflect on how they came to love that person, just like I asked you just a moment ago. Nobody ever answered, I went to the library and checked out a book. Because that's not how we learn to know somebody really. Love develops relationally. The same is true with God. Many of us know the words, I am God's beloved child. We've heard that language. It even feels good for a moment, perhaps. We've heard the sermons, we've memorized the verses, we've sung the songs, our heads nod in agreement. But here's how this plays out relationally. We may understand belovedness propositionally while still carrying shame emotionally. We may believe God loves us while simultaneously fearing rejection. We may affirm grace while living as though our worth depends upon our performance. This is why spiritual formation is not merely about learning new information. It's about learning to experience the love of God in the deepest parts of our being. Let me say that again. Spiritual formation is not merely about learning new information. It's about learning to experience the love of God in the deepest parts of our being. Maybe this is a good time for me to give you our definition here at LifePoint Resources, our definition of Christian spiritual formation. Christian spiritual formation is a lifelong process of experiencing God's love and being formed in the image of Christ for the sake of the world. See, you hear that? It's a lifelong process. We never stop experiencing God's love. We never stop being formed. We're always being formed into what? Into the image of Christ for the sake of the world. So this is why we say what we're engaged in is being with Jesus and becoming people of love, people who love like Jesus. So again, that's why I reiterate this. Spiritual formation is not merely about learning new information. We've got to experience it. We've got to take it in. We've got to move it from our head to our heart. You know, they talk about that's the longest journey, right? The 18-inch journey from our head to our heart. But that's got to get into the deepest parts of our being. And so the question beneath so much of our spiritual formation is not simply, what do I believe? I think if we're leaning into this relational spirituality idea, we begin to ask another question. In whom do I trust? Over the years, I've become increasingly convinced that trust is one of the central themes of the spiritual life. Again, Plass and Cofield, they write, trust is the key factor determining our patterns of relating to God and to others. Trust is the key factor determining the ways that we relate to God and to others. That's a big statement. Trust determines our patterns of relating. It gets to that place of attachment. Trust affects our openness. Trust affects our curiosity. Trust affects our ability to receive love. It affects our ability to offer love. It affects intimacy. It affects vulnerability. Yeah, it does. It affects everything in terms of how we relate to God and to others and to ourselves. A few years ago during Advent, I was sensing God inviting me into a simple practice. I just read one psalm each day for 37 days, beginning with Psalm 1 on December 1st, ending with Psalm 37 on Epiphany. And as I reflected on those psalms, one theme surfaced over and over again. The theme was trust. You know, there's a wonderful version of the Bible. It's called The Voice. Have you ever heard it or come across it? It's called The Voice. And in it, Psalm 28, verse 7 reads as follows. It says, "The Eternal is the source of my strength and the shield that guards me. When I learn to rest and truly trust him, he sends his help." I love the way that's phrased in that particular version. He says, when I learn to rest and truly trust him. Okay, so all of a sudden we get this idea that trust is more than agreement. Trust is actually resting. Trust is surrendering. Trust is coming home and dwelling. Trust is an experiential learning. Learning what? Learning that God is actually as good as God says he is. And it's also coming to believe that if God calls us his beloved children, then that is in fact who we are. Trust is resting in that reality. It's coming home and dwelling and living from that place. You know, I talk a lot about walking the Camino. In Spain, I walked just last year, this time last year, in fact, as the date of this recording. And an interesting thing happened along the way. I stayed in many albergues along the way, which is just big dormitory kind of places for pilgrims. Every night you just kind of pick a bed and hopefully you don't have to sleep on the top bunk. If you're old like me, you want to sleep on the bottom bunk. So you get there early enough to hopefully get a bottom bunk. But here I was on the bottom bunk one night sleeping trying to sleep, I should say. Above me was a friend I had met, and we had walked for many days along the same path. And his name is JR. And JR, at this point in the journey, was having a hard time sleeping through the night without snoring a lot. And it just so happened that across the room, there was another guy who earlier that day, when we met him, we asked him, why did he have a spray bottle in his hand? And his answer was kind of cheeky. He said, the spray bottle is for two things. It's to keep me cool during the heat of the day, and it's also to spray pilgrims in the middle of the night when they're snoring. And we laughed, but I thought, uh-oh, my friend JR is having a tough time sleeping, and he's snoring a lot, and oh boy, I wonder if this is really the case. And sure enough, in the middle of the night, I hear a spray bottle spraying, and I'm starting to feel water on myself, and I'm in the bottom bunk, and my friend is above me. And suddenly I realize what's happening. This pilgrim really he's spraying the person who's snoring, and he thinks I'm the offender. And so I'm getting sprayed. And so I just spoke up and said, hey, stop it. That's not me. And I think I was worried that, my friend would wake up and maybe he would be entirely drenched from all this water and he would feel embarrassed or something like that. I don't even know, but it was in the middle of the night, and I thought, how could this be happening, right? So anyway, not too much longer, I got up in the middle, kind of like 5 a.m. It's still dark. I gathered my stuff as quiet as I could, and I was going to start walking the next day. And I came down the stairs, and I was in the lobby. I was putting on my shoes, and here comes this pilgrim who was spraying the spray bottle the night before, or that same night. And he wanted to say goodbye to me. He also wanted to challenge me with something. And I thought it was a little bit out of left field. He said something about my ability to trust. He kind of questioned my ability to trust other people. Now, maybe he didn't even say that. He just talked about trust. And that was something that needed to be worked out. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. I'm not the one who was spraying other people in the middle of the night, but okay. And I just kind of wanted to get out of there, I think, as fast as I could. And so I left and started walking. But something interesting happened. I felt like God was saying, hey, just think about that for a minute. My messengers can come in a myriad of ways. Just think about all the ways the messengers spoke in the Bible, right? So I began to just ask God, is there something there? Is there something you want me to explore? Do I have an issue with trust that can be worked out here? And the answer was, well, of course I do. And God was kind. God was patient. And God began to show me lots of things as I walked, day after day after day. One of the things he showed me, and you can't see this because I'm not doing a video of this, but he showed me that I had been carrying a posture for a long time that was conflicting. If you can imagine that with one hand, I was kind of beckoning people to come closer. I was beckoning God to come closer. I was beckoning my wife, my friends, my church community, come closer, come closer. And with the other hand, simultaneously, I'm protesting, stay away, stay away. Come closer, stay away. You want to talk about confusing? I feel that. I felt that. And I'm sure other people have as well. Those closest to me, those wanting to get close to me, those confused by the mixed messages that I would be offering. I want relationship, but don't come any closer. And the question to God was, well, where is that coming from? And I had lots of time on the pilgrimage to think and pray about that very thing. Where is that resistance, that protest coming from? Surely it must be a lack of trust. And as I just sank into that even deeper, it became clear to me that my issue with trust wasn't really so much about whether I trusted other people, and it was less and less about whether I trusted God. It was mostly about trusting myself. And I think that underneath that would have been this continual sense of like this shame and guilt of a life of regret and some areas of places that I just couldn't release and experience freedom from, even all these years later. So there is a sense of not trusting myself with others. So I want to be close with you, but I don't trust myself to not hurt you or let you down or leave you. And so maybe it's best that you stay away. Trust. There was a sense of God wanting to show me experientially by giving me that sense of that posture and letting me work it out as I walked, to really see it and visualize it and ask these deeper questions. What's happening here? And to really even begin to come back home to myself. God used Psalm 139 to help me come back home to myself, one who is fearfully and wonderfully made, seen by God, known by God, loved by God, with God. Maybe we can return for a minute to Psalm 28:7, as it's paraphrased again in The Voice, that version that I especially enjoy reading from time to time. Here's that full text of Psalm 28:7. The eternal, talking about God, the eternal is the source of my strength and the shield that guards me. When I learn to rest and truly trust him, he sends his help. That is why my heart is singing. I open my mouth to praise him, and thankfulness rises as song. So do you see what happens when we learn to rest and trust God? There is this freedom that opens up, a direct line to gratitude, to worship. And you see David repeatedly connecting these themes of trust and gratitude and worship throughout the Psalms. The more he remembers God's faithfulness, the more he trusts. And the more he trusts, the more gratitude rises in his heart. Perhaps you've experienced that too. When we intentionally remember God's faithfulness, our confidence grows. It soars even. We begin to recognize God's presence in places we previously overlooked. We notice the people he's placed in our lives. We remember the ways God has sustained us, and our trust deepens. Believe me, I could tell you stories. Stories of failure. Stories of shame and anxiety, exhaustion, seasons when I felt lost. Oh, but I can also tell you stories of God's goodness. Stories of sitting on a bench along a prayer trail in Divide, Colorado, encountering Jesus in a way that truly changed me. Stories of friends who arrived at exactly the right time. People who listened without trying to fix me. People who reflected God's love back to me. People who taught me trust. I can tell you stories of my wife, Rebecca, whose faithful presence has been one of God's greatest gifts in my life. You see, through all of these loving relationships, I've come to trust God more deeply, and I'm learning to trust even myself and others more deeply. And that brings me to one of my favorite lines from Plass and Cofield. We learn to love well only by being loved well. We learn to love well by being loved well. What if that's true? What if spiritual formation is not primarily about trying harder, but about receiving love more deeply? The authors of Relational Spirituality, Todd Hall and Elizabeth, write this. They say, we rely on loving relationships to develop normally in the early years, and we depend on loving interactions with others to thrive throughout life. I love that language, thriving. Do you want to thrive? I do. So again, They say we rely on loving relationships, right, in the early years to develop normally. That's how we get these secure attachment bonds. And we depend on loving interactions with others to thrive throughout life. It's not like a one and done, it's an ongoing thing. Then they add this beautiful phrase, we are loved into loving. And that feels deeply biblical, deeply sacred, deeply true to me. You don't have to look far. We love because God, what? He first loved us. We love because God first loved us. God's love always comes first, and his love often reaches us through other people, through friendship, through marriage, potentially, if that's what the calling is on your life, through community, for sure, through spiritual direction, yeah, through mentors and through teachers and other people who are walking this journey with us, right? When you look to your left and you look to your right, who is with you? Who is walking the sacred way with you? Whoever those people are, it's through these relationships where we are fully known and we're deeply loved. And this has profound implications for the work that I love to do when I sit with someone in a space called spiritual direction. One of the phrases I use a lot is this: we listen people into the love of God. Another way I would say it is we listen people back into the light of God's love, like out of hiding, right? Out of hiding and shame behind that bush and into the light of God's love. We listen people into the love of God. We cannot make transformation happen in lives of people. We can't manufacture it. We can't control the pace. We can't control the outcome. We can't force healing. But in spiritual direction, it's a wonderful gift when we can simply show up and we pay attention and we become present and we listen and we wonder and we trust the Spirit of God. Henri Nouwen reminds us we cannot change people, but we can offer them a hospitable space where change can take place. And that, to me, is what spiritual direction provides. It's a hospitable space, hospitality, a welcome, a receptivity, and a curiosity, and a presence. These are the things that become like sacred gifts. And the world that we are living in doesn't offer much of this anymore. Andy Crouch tells a story about walking through O'Hare Airport. He says rather than retreating into his phone, he decides to pay attention to the people around him, the mass of people. And as he walked, he began to repeat a simple phrase. Every person he saw, he just said, image bearer, image bearer, image bearer. Every person, every face, every story, image bearer. I love that practice. Whether you're someone who offers spiritual direction or you're someone who receives it, when you're sitting across from someone in a space like spiritual direction, a listening space, do you realize you're sitting across from an image bearer? That's right. Your directee is an image bearer. Your director is an image bearer. Your spouse is an image bearer. Your coworker is an image bearer. The difficult person in your life is an image bearer. And you are an image bearer. You are one deeply loved by God. One invited into relationship. One designed for communion. One designed for trust and love. Oh, I love this guy, Trevor Hudson. One of my favorite interviews I ever did on the Being Formed podcast was with Trevor Hudson. And he writes this. He says, there are many possible reasons why some of us find it hard to know ourselves as God's beloved. And I think right there, I would just say image bearer. Okay. God's beloved. You're an image bearer. But Trevor's saying there's lots of reasons why it's hard for us. He describes attachment wounds, painful life experiences, suffering, disappointment, and all the many voices that undermine our identity. So many voices. Our own, the world's, the enemy's. I suspect many of you know exactly what Trevor's talking about. You want to believe you're beloved, right? But something inside resists some old wound or old fear, old story. Maybe that's why Jesus tells that story of the prodigal son. Maybe actually that's why he tells the story of both sons, right? One runs away while one stays home, and both misunderstand the heart of the Father. Both need to come home. Perhaps that's the deepest invitation of spiritual formation. Coming home. Coming home to the God who sees us and delights in us. Coming home to the God who's never stopped watching the horizon. Years ago, while reflecting on this, I wrote a poem called Home. And I'd like to close our time together by reading it. My child, I see you and I hear you. As tears rush from your innocent eyes, my heart breaks for you. You call yourself broken. I call you beloved. You call yourself wounded. I call you wonderful. You call yourself unloved and unworthy. I call you unaware. You're unaware of the potential I see in you, the beauty I see in your soul, the love rushing up in my heart every single time I think of you. There's nothing more important to me than knowing you and being known by you. Nothing. When you feel alone, I'm not as far away as you think. When you fear my anger or disappointment, I am at that very moment on the lookout, waiting to see you on the horizon, returning to the place where we can once again delight in each other and your heart can finally know home. Maybe today you're listening and you find yourself somewhere in that story. Maybe you're weary. Maybe you're disappointed. Maybe you're lonely. Or you're struggling to trust. Maybe you've forgotten you're the beloved of God. My prayer is that you would experience God's love not merely as an idea, but as a lived reality. I would love for you to know yourself as God's beloved. I'd love for you to experience that to be true. And so I want to end our time together by letting you know about a very significant next step for LifePoint resources. We've talked about it already on a previous episode, but it's called the Sacred Way Community. And the Sacred Way Community, which begins in September 2027 with a cohort of around 20 people, is going to be a 19-month journey of 7 retreats over the course of 19 months. Every 3 months, there'll be a retreat in person in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with your cohort, where we will just form a community that holds us in this space of being known, of being loved, of experiencing the love of God, and participating in cooperating with the work that God is doing in us for the sake of the world. cohort learning experiences are really significant in my own personal life. I've been a part of many of them, whether it was in my master's degree or in my training as a spiritual director. I've also been part of the transforming community with Ruth Haley Barton. And what we're trying to do at LifePoint is provide this kind of a community, because I don't think there'll ever be enough of these kinds of communities, especially in what I would agree with when other people call this era that we're living in kind of this disconnected era or season. We're in a disconnected age. We need community. We need people who are walking like pilgrims down the same path we're walking at a similar pace to us, looking to their left, looking to their right, finding one another, and actually sharing both in the suffering and the joy of the process of growing more and more into the image of Christ. We don't promise at the end of 19 months that suddenly you will be finally transformed. No, that happens when we move on to be with God forever and ever in eternity. But on this side of eternity, in the kingdom, we are becoming increasingly more and more people of love. And we do that by being with Jesus, who shows us how to live in this sacred way. We learn the Jesus way. We can't have the Jesus life without the Jesus way. So we've got to learn to live the Jesus way, and we do that in community. So again, if you are hearing this and you're going, something in here deeply resonates with me, I hope that you'll make your way to our website, find the tab at the top of the page that says the Sacred Way Community, and fill out the interest form so that we can begin to get information out to those who are interested in the formation of this brand new 19-month cohort learning community. It's going to be great. I can't wait for you to experience that. I hope that if you are even at least a little bit interested, you'll consider this a worthwhile investment in your soul, and you'll take the next step and you'll fill out the interest form. Until we have a chance to meet again, I pray that your trust will continue to deepen. I pray that you will know yourself as God's beloved. I pray that you will discover again that you are not alone. May your relational soul find itself increasingly at home in the presence of Christ. So, friends, keep walking the path. Christ is with you, and you're being formed. Until next time, grace and peace.